Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to this episode of The Invisible Critic. I am your host, The Invisible Critic from North New Jersey, and this is the sub-series, The Forbidden History of the Globalist Conspiracy. Now, in the last episode, we discussed the Illuminati and the American and French revolutions, how they were different. Today, we're going to go back to the American Revolution and show how even within the American Revolution, there was a liberty, pro-Republican, anti-monarchist faction, but also there were intriguers and schemers who was in cahoots with the criminal bankers back in London. So it was never a clean break from that British Jewish monetary London system. Now we go back to 1764. This is one of the causes of the American Revolution that doesn't get a lot of attention. But it was the Currency Act. Britain forbid the colonies from printing their own money. And, you know, if he who controls the money supply could control the economy of the country, and Britain wanted to keep it with the London central bankers, private bankers controlling the deal, that created a lot of controversy and conflict. So it wasn't just about taxation without representation. There's a whole lot of factors at work. But monetary policy, central banking, currency manipulation was one of them. And now we're not going to go too deep in the American Revolution because we want to focus on the New World Order, the globalist conspiracy, most of the stuff you should have learned in school if you're an American. 1773, that was a big event, the Boston Massacre, so-called. And that really got public sentiment whipped up in that area in favor of breaking away from Britain. But, you know, it was a secret society called the Sons of Liberty who kind of incited this, provoked the British into firing some shots, killing some people. So not all the American revolutionists were pure in the way they operated. 1773, later that year, same year, the Boston Tea Party. Again, it was the Sons of Liberty who got together and threw the tea into the harbor, protesting the taxes on the tea. But this was all like incitement. A lot of this was conspiratorial to get the revolution going. 1775, the British, they send their troops to New Hampshire, Lexington, and Concord. They came to confiscate guns. And the colonists met them, a ragtag bunch of colonists firing behind trees and bushes. And they beat them back. That was called the shot heard round the world. That really got the revolution going. The following year, 1776, was the Declaration of Independence. Written by Thomas Jefferson. We talked about that in the last episode. Now, here's something a lot of people don't realize. That, you know, you have a revolution, any kind of war, you got to have money, big money. Where did the colonists get their money? Well, this was the principal financier. His name was Harim Solomon. He was a big Jewish moneylender. Without him, the United States couldn't have won the revolution. And he was also a member of the Sons of Liberty. In some ways, they were the sons of bitches. You see, but so you had this element back then, their motives weren't always pure. I mean, it's almost like you had good guys and bad guys within the same American Revolution. But I am convinced that part of this was to weaken the British Empire. But there can be no good motives to ascribe to a guy like Harim Solomon. He's just a money grubber. But anyway, finally, after many years, I mean, the revolution was like the whole thing between the controversy and the actual war. It was like 10, 15 years before the British said, okay, you can have your independence. And the early American colonies, they lived under what was called the Articles of Confederation. So the 13 colonies were really like 13 little countries that just got together with some common rules. So it was very weak, very decentralized. And that's the way some people wanted it, but there were others who said, you know, how can we defend ourselves as a country? We need something a little stronger to bring us together. And that's how the United States Constitution came around, 1789. A lot of people think the Constitution was to weaken the power of central government. In actuality, it was to strengthen it, but with limits. So there were limits, and there was the Bill of Rights built into it. So there was like a compromise. So the Constitution did not come to like 8 years after the Revolutionary War. And at the convention, the hero of the war, George Washington, became the first president of the United States. He was such a heroic, respected figure at that time that he was able to keep all the factions like kind of united. But, you know, after he was gone, already the United States, and it's been so ever since, there's always been this clash represented by people like Thomas Jefferson on one side, the author of the Declaration of Independence. He was Secretary of State under George Washington, important member of the administration. And he wanted limited government. And he was against central banking. He saw it as a scam. I'm going to read you a quote by Thomas Jefferson. He says, the system of, actually, this quote was like many years later when he's reflecting back upon the system of central banking. He says, the system is a blot on all our constitutions, which, if not covered, will end in their destruction. I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. So at the time when there was this big debate about should we have a central bank, he was totally opposed to it. But this guy, Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, okay? This guy's no good. He's a villain. He was an agent of the London bankers. These were private bankers. The first central bank in the United States was privately owned, and he was a big advocate. So that was the big first, you could call this the first bank war in United States history, and there were several to come. Jefferson versus Hamilton, a conflict of visions. Okay, so you had liberty and independent nationalism on one side, and then you had big government agent of the London private bankers, New World Order, Alexander Hamilton. So that was a fight within the administration of George Washington, and ultimately Hamilton prevailed. And we did get the first central bank in the United States, the Bank of the United States in Philadelphia, with a 20-year charter, privately owned. Most of them was foreign shareholders in London. It's all murky, and a lot of them was these Jewish bankers. They're running the monetary system from London. This is the very beginning of the founding of the United States, so we never really broke free from that European system. And what central banking does is it enables the central bankers, private central bankers, to control the economy. They can rig the money supply, and every dollar is created an interest. So they lend out a dollar, whether the bank is purchasing bonds or making loans to consumers. They lend out a dollar, but you got to pay them back $1.10. So you have this compounding interest, and that is why you cannot live in today's society without mortgages and car loans and student debt. Everything is debt, and there's more debt than there is money in circulation. It sounds complicated, but it's not. And it's very simple to understand. You need to get this book, Bancarotta by M.S. King. I got it linked down below. It talks about the scam of lending money at interest, and then beyond that, the even bigger scam of a central bank that lends to the individual banks. And that is why we live in a debt-slave society. And Jefferson warned against this from the beginning, and Hamilton advocated in favor of it. And this is key to understanding the New World Order, because central banking is at the core. That's the funding mechanism, the main enslavement mechanism of the New World Order. Dishonest central banking, which creates money out of thin air and lends it to you at interest. They buy government bonds. They make money out of thin air and they collect interest on it. What a scam. And then the Rothschilds, we talked about them earlier in an earlier episode. They just get richer and richer and richer with this scam. You can't buy a home without going into debt. A mortgage. Mortgage comes from French mort, death. Gage, pledge. The pledge of death is what mortgage means. Okay? Comes from, I think it's French or Latin. Pledge of death. That's why we're slaves. And Hamilton got his way. And then early on, he imposed a whiskey tax. He's the Secretary of the Treasury. He also president of the first central bank. And the farmers out West Pennsylvania, they protested this whiskey tax. This was Hamilton's tax. And this artwork depicts a tax collector being ridden out of town on a rail, tarred and feathered. Men was men back then. They didn't play. They don't pay these taxes. And Hamilton, he was the one who incited these people to rebel. And then he wanted to crush him militarily. And it was George Washington, who kind of tried to compromise with these people. And he lowered the tensions. And, things ended without violence. But if it was Hamilton's, he would have crushed these people. No good, this Alexander Hamilton. And that is why he is puffed up so much. I'm sure you heard of the Broadway play Hamilton, right? They portray him as a hero because, he was the very first agent of the London Jewish banking cabal. And by the way, his stepfather was Jewish, and he was not even born in America. He was born in the West Indies. He spoke Hebrew. He went to a Jewish school, so he was all hooked up with these bankers. He was an intriguer. And the vice president at the time, one of America's key founders, John Adams, here's what he said about Alexander Hamilton. He said, quote, "He is the most restless, impatient, artful, indefatigable, unprincipled intriguer in the United States, if not the world. So there you have it. Since its inception, the United States has been plagued with this conflict between central banking and an honest banking system. So this bank got a 20-year charter, and we'll talk about it in a future episode, what happens after the 20 years when they killed it. And then there was a second central bank and a third. I mean, it's all at the core of this New World Order business. But I wanted you to understand how it's part of the American founding, and we've had this conflict. It wasn't born with Woodrow Wilson. We've had it from the beginning of the Republic, and we're still trying to break free from this London banking access, which has since shifted to kind of New York. So now you know a little more about the American Revolution, how it ties into the conspiracy. And the next episode, we're going to go back to Europe, and we're going to talk about the great Napoleon Bonaparte, who pulled France out of the chaos of the revolution, and then the bankers went against him. It's a great story. But until next time, this is your host, the Invisible Critic, asking you to like this video, subscribe, check out the links below, especially the book that I posted, and we'll see you soon with the next episode on Napoleon. Ciao.